The Chargers made a splash on Monday, signing Pro Bowl tight end David Njoku, and suddenly they have one of the best tight end rooms in the NFL.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. David, what do we got today?
It's all about the tight ends on today's show. We got to hear from Charlie Kolar, and he just got back from a great honeymoon and went straight to work, and we got to hear why he is absolutely a Jim Harbaugh type of guy. We also got to hear from the tight ends coach as well, and we got to hear about what this move, adding David Njoku, is going to mean for Oronde Gadsden II, and of course, we have to get into the big splash edition. That is Chief David Njoku.
It's so funny, man, because there were so many times where we had kind of pounded the table for David Njoku to the Chargers, especially, you know, when you're going through the Jared Cooks and the Gerald Everetts of the world, and this is someone saying, hey, trade the Browns for David Njoku. Obviously, they're not going anywhere, and, guy that absolutely put it all on the line for a team that was never any good in his time there for the most part, outside of one Baker Mayfield season. But per Ian Rappaport, the Chargers have agreed to terms of former Browns tight end David Njoku, giving him a one-year deal worth up to $8 million. Yeah, this is an interesting move. Obviously, the Chargers adding strength to strength in this move, but I think it's more about a numbers game, right? Like, we knew the Chargers needed another tight end. There wasn't an undrafted free agent or anyone on the roster else, other than Oronde Gadsden and Charlie Kolar that were kind of sure roster locks or really had anything but question marks next to them. They needed another guy, and it's great because they're getting a guy that I think probably has a more well-rounded skill set than the guys that they have right now, right? He's not just a receiving guy. He's not just a blocking tight end, which has kind of been the rub, for Charlie Kolar and Oronde Gadsden. But also, you get a guy that you can hope, to get more out of because you don't necessarily need him to carry the bulk of the offense as far as the tight end production. So, a move that I like, right? In a vacuum, obviously not comparing it to any other moves the Chargers have made or have not made. As far as a roster standpoint, you're getting another weapon in this offense, a guy who still has some juice. I like it.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's just another weapon for Justin Herbert, another way to make this offense more multiple, a guy that can give you a little bit of everything. A guy that has a good enough frame to be able to be an effective blocker. He can absolutely move. He has good strength. Obviously, we know what he can do as a pass catcher. Obviously, he's been dealing with a little bit of injuries, has missed some time over the last couple of years. So that's probably the biggest concern when you're talking about David Njoku. But when we're talking about an up to $8 million, that means that the base is much lower than that. And then incentives are going to have to be what gets him up to that $8 million range. I just think this just makes this tight end room a lot more complete and a lot more dangerous for the rest of the league.
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. I mean, I believe that for this group specifically to get him who has, so much of a track record, even if it hasn't been as recently where he's had a ton of success, like, what he is. Like, he is a known commodity. And right now, like, there's upside to Charlie Kolar as a pass catcher. There's potential upside maybe for Oronde Gadsden to become kind of a more complete tight end and not be a liability in blocking. But this guy, can do both. And I think that's what I saw. I mean, he's definitely coming off of a couple of down years, but I would say the first thing, great hands, right? Like a highlight reel last season of just contested catches he was making, 9 out of 12 overall in contested catches, only 2 drops season on 46 targets, a red zone weapon, right? Someone that can win not just by going up over the top, but like someone that has the frame to kind of box guys out as well. And also win with physicality on his routes when things get a little bit more condensed, right? That's not really what Oronde Gadsden's game is. He works better when he's in space. There's a lot of times you saw last year with David Njoku where he's kind of manhandling his way into an open position in the end zone, and that is something that I think is valuable. And I think as far as, what he still brings to the table, I still think, watching him, you can still see the juice after the catch. Maybe not as many guys getting hurdled these days, but if you're not careful, it could still be you ending up on the poster. 17th out of 38 eligible tight ends in yards after the catch per catch at 5.0 yards after the catch per catch. Only 3 missed tackles forced, but I do think also, yeah, he's big enough to become an impact blocker. I think he lacked consistency there and maybe want to a little bit. But yeah, I mean, this is a move that you're thinking that they're gonna looking for a bounce back, right?
Yeah.
Last two seasons, last year 12 games, 33 catches, 293 yards. 2024 11 games, 64 catches, 505 yards, under 8 yards per catch. But obviously also plagued by a just truly horrendous group of quarterbacks that he's been forced to play with, and was also surpassed by Harold Fannin Jr., who became a bigger weapon in that Browns offense, or just kind of a more young up and coming guy. So I think this is something where it's like, yeah, man, if this dude bounces back, like, you're going to have a hell of a player on your hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for Mike McDaniel, the pitch is like, hey, look what I just did with Darren Waller, right? I had him on limited time, and I got him 6 touchdowns last year. I think that's
after being out of the game completely, too. Yeah.
And you know, in a major red zone threat. So, like, I mean, I think that would be one of the things. Obviously, getting to play with the best quarterback that he's ever had in his NFL career obviously is going to be a big selling point as well for David Njoku. And also, like, he's been in Cleveland his entire career. Like, the dude's never been able to win, never had really any chance to win anything. And the Chargers obviously haven't got the job done, but they've been in the playoffs the last 2 years. So you want an opportunity to go win and go be playing meaningful games in December and in the playoffs, and you want to have that chance. Say what you want, but the Chargers have been there in back-to-back years, and everything that they have done has positioned them to do that again and be competitive again in 2026.
And I think the nice thing about this move is, like, you didn't really need to do it, but it does help. And like, you had two guys you feel really good about in Oronde and Charlie Kolar, but at the same time, like, now you look at this room and it's like, it looks like one of the best tight end rooms in the NFL with what it can bring to the table, and it's easily the best tight end room that Justin Herbert has ever had, for sure.
It is no question about it. Two guys that are real, legitimate pass-catching threats with Oronde Gadsden and now David Njoku. Also a guy who has some untapped potential as a receiver in Charlie Kolar, something that he just really didn't get the opportunity to do, but, you know, was one of the reasons why he wanted to come here, is because he might have more of an opportunity to do that. And, you know, with Mike McDaniel, everybody is going to get fed. There's going to be opportunities for everybody to get their chances. And, you know, that's why this is so exciting, because these guys will bring real deception with their ability to, you know, run block and to be able to, you know, be serious threats as a pass catcher. And Justin Herbert has already demonstrated that he loves his tight ends. If you can get open, Justin Herbert is absolutely going to find you.
Well, and I mean, just look at what this room looks like compared to really the last 2 seasons, right? Like, you're talking about 2024 when Jim Harbaugh takes over. That's a room that has Will Dissly, who's not even the starter, right? It was Hayden Hurst who was going to be the starter, and then Will Dissly, and then that was pretty much it, right? Stone Smart, I think, maybe was hanging around then. But then also you look at last year even, right? You replace Hayden Hurst, that doesn't work out. You bring in Tyler Conklin, right? You have Tyler Conklin backed up by Will Dissly, and then you have a total unknown and an Oronde Gadsden, who was not even that high on the depth chart because he was behind Tucker Fisk, right? So to have this version of Oronde Gadsden, a guy who was a healthy scratch the first 2 weeks of the season last year, to have him, you know, be up at the top, but then to also have a Charlie Kolar who they've shown you major, and, you know, with their money, they've shown you how valuable they believe he's going to be. And then also you add in David Njoku now, who is that proven commodity. But you're right, like, you can get a little bit, you know, crazy with the kind of mismatches that you can create now that you have all of these different weapons, and also you just build that depth. But like, Justin Herbert had, you know, Hunter Henry as a rookie, like that, maybe, you know, up until last year with Oronde Gadsden was the best he'd had, but then it was Jared Cook as his leading tight end. Then it was Gerald Everett for a couple seasons as his leading tight end. Then it was Will Dissly as his leading tight end. You know what I mean? And he's consistently given tight ends the career best years they've ever had. You also throw into the mix, you have someone like an Alec Ingold, right, who can play some tight end as well, can run some routes, has played tight end, and will do that for some snaps this year. And he is someone who's really mobile, right, and brings even a different kind of skill set. And even Scott Matlock, who we'll talk about later on the show, who's moving to tight end full time. But I think this is tipping a little bit of what Mike McDaniel wants to do offensively this year. And I think there's one huge way that this signing shows us kind of what we can expect, and it would be a major change from what they did in 2025. So we're going to get into that and what this means for Oronde Gadsden and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed, Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who will actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. But it's not just not about the amount of hires. It's about getting quality hires so you don't have to try to fill that position again. So spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help your job post get the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. So go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. David, there is one thing that definitely came to my mind once the Chargers made this move to bring in David Njoku, because you don't bring in David Njoku for an up to $8 million contract, which, the up to could be doing a lot of work there. We don't know exactly at this point what part of that is guaranteed, but they're expecting to use all these tight ends. We know how good Oronde Gadsden is. We know the investment that they made in Charlie Kolar, right? 3 years, $8+ million for a blocking tight end is unheard of. And that's what they were willing to give out because of what they think he can be. With this move, I'm more convinced now than ever, especially with the way the NFL has trended this offseason, that the Chargers are going to lean more into multiple tight end sets, which last season they had the lowest percentage of 12 personnel in the league. And surprisingly, the Dolphins ranked 29th, which is you have one running back, two tight ends, two receivers, right? So two tight ends on the field at the same time. And the Dolphins were down there too. But as we've kind of seen this offseason with how many tight ends were drafted, right? With the Chargers putting this much of an investment, right? $40 million or $30+ million spent on tight ends just in this offseason. It feels very likely we're going to see them lean in that direction offensively.
Yeah, and they're definitely not alone. There's a lot of really, really good tight end duos around the league, whether you look at Buffalo with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, or even the Raiders with Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. New England had Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. Obviously, Atlanta had Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith, not anymore because he's not there anymore. But there is a lot of examples of some great tight end pairings that have run roughshod on the NFL. So it makes sense to why the reason why you want to have these bigger bodied type guys that are harder for defenders to try to match up against, right? Like these are guys that are uber athletic, that can run really good routes, that have really good hands. Like that's what, makes it so difficult to try to defend tight ends, because they are just rare combinations of size and speed. And now you not only have one guy you have to worry about, you have two, maybe even three guys that you have to worry about, and you just can't really bank on what they're going to do when they're all on the field, because you could absolutely have them all blocking. I mean, that just means you have more mobile guys, more mobile athletic guys that can get out in space and really attack that space, with a little bit more speed. And of course, you can go right around and run play action off of that and be really, really deceptive and really evil to opposing defenses. So there's a lot you can do with the multiple tight ends.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do we say all the time? It's a copycat league, right?
It is.
The Rams had the top scoring offense in the NFL last year, right? They used 13 personnel, which is 3 tight ends on the field, 1 receiver, and 1 running back, 30% of the time last year. 30% of their offensive snaps, they were in 3 tight end looks.
That's
Get rid of
lot.
2 tight end looks. They had the highest EPA, obviously, in the NFL doing it. For comparison, the Chargers ran 13 personnel 1.92% of the time, right?
Wow.
The Rams are running it over 15 times more than the Chargers were last year. Obviously, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, a lot of similarities into that offense, right? But
sure.
the Chargers last year leaned much more into interior offensive linemen or just extra offensive linemen at the end of the line of scrimmage. The problem with that is nobody's actually afraid you're going to pass out of it. And if you are going to pass out of it, nobody's afraid that Trevor Penning's going to beat him on the post route, right? So, like, this will look a lot different than that. And I think it kind of even more shows how much Mike McDaniel's willing to kind of mold his offense to the players, right, and change things up and give the Chargers offense a different look than what he was running in Miami. Because, like I said, last year they only ran 2 tight ends on the field at the 29th highest rate in the league. So, like, this isn't something they were doing a lot of. I think there will be in 2026 for sure. But it was also interesting hearing from David Njoku's new coach about his fit, on the team, as far as if you were wondering why. I thought that most interesting thing here he said was, that's a good football player. I think he's going to be a really cool addition. I don't know exactly how we're going to use him yet. But you also pointed out another part to me, David. I think it's from Alex Ingold, who had the quote of him just saying, like, he's hungry for winning football. And we can thank the Browns for that, because they were obviously awful for a big part of his career. But to me, David, what that shows is a buy-in from him that makes me more confident in the signing, right? Because I do think there was maybe at times a want-to issue, especially when you're playing in meaningless games down the stretch of season, especially as a run blocker. Just by him signing with the Chargers, a room that already has other guys he's going to have to compete with, a room he's not just going to walk in and be the guy after being the guy for so long in Cleveland, makes me more optimistic about this, because I do think that's like, hey, that's him already showing, hey, I'm willing to maybe take a lesser role to find where my role fits, as long as it leads to me winning more than I have been.
Yeah, and the thing with David Njoku, he's been in the league for quite a while now, almost a decade, right? He's made some good money playing in the NFL.
Yeah.
Now it's about trying to win. And I think now he's trying to put that at the forefront, right? And he's trying to sacrifice maybe not being the guy, because, I mean, hey, we're talking about May here, and he finally is signing on the dotted line with the football team. Yeah. So he definitely took his time, right? Whether it was him or whether it was just prospective, teams that were wanting to try to bring him in. But this took a while. And even, it wasn't an immediate decision either by him to sign, right? They brought him in a week ago, right? And he took a little bit of time to figure out if this was the right situation for him. And ultimately, he decided that it was. And it makes a lot of sense. You have a great quarterback. You have a fantastic coach. You have a plethora of weapons. You have a great defense. Like, you have a lot of tools and pieces in place to go try to win a lot of football games. And after you make a lot of money, right, it's kind of like the Khalil Mack situation. Like, Khalil Mack doesn't need to make any more money. He wants to win. He wants to win championships. And this is another example of a player that feels like their best chance to win is coming to play for the Chargers.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's easy to see how he fits in, especially if he's not the main guy all the time. But it does kind of, make you wonder kind of how the target share is going to go now in that tight end room, and if there's any reason for a concern for the role of Oronde Gadsden is going to have in 2026. Do you have any concerns about what that role is going to be?
No, I don't think so. I don't have any concern about the role, especially with who is actually calling the plays. I think with Mike McDaniel, he's going to find a way to get the ball to everybody. I mean, this is a guy who just went out and said that he expects every single one of his wide receivers to achieve new career highs. So that speaks to me as someone who is very, very confident that he's going to be able to get the most out of all of the weapons that he has at his disposal. So I'm not concerned about it at all. I think it actually will give him some more opportunities to maybe cycle through, stay healthy throughout the year, and just gives them more deception in their offense. So I'm excited about what this will mean for the Chargers tight end room. But for Oronde Gadsden, I think he's incredibly talented, and I think they're going to find ways to get him the football. When they went away from him last year, it didn't make a lot of sense, because when he was one of the focal points of the offense was humming.
Yeah, it was, and it didn't really make a lot of sense for him to have only 14 catches over the last 7 games, only 2 per game. But I have seen some people at least theorize that a big part of that was it was just a huge tell that the Chargers were throwing the football when he was on the field, which,
sure,
the numbers bear that out a little bit. I mean, he was only asked to block on 33% of his snaps last year, which meant there was a 2/3 chance you're seeing him on the field, especially if it's, other obviously long, obvious passing down situations where nobody's afraid of him run blocking you, right? Or being able to stay in and pass block. And to me, the thing I always think about is Mike Gesicki, right? He just,
Sure.
Mike McDaniel took over Miami in 2022. The year before that, Mike Gesicki had 73 catches in 2021. He had just 32 in 2022 and then wasn't re-signed. So, I mean, to me, Gadsden's a better receiver than Njoku at this point of his career. At the same time, like, his lack of blocking will cost him snaps potentially on this team. It doesn't mean he can't be used and that he won't be used. But I think it has more of an impact from a fantasy perspective, potentially hurting him with Njoku being such a red zone threat. But yeah, I mean, it did make me feel better to hear the Chargers tight end coach Chandler Henley actually say, hey, we think Oronde Gadsden is a really good fit for this offense, and also hearing from Charlie Kolar, who just seems like the most Jim Harbaugh guy. So we're going to get into that and more into his Locked On Chargers podcast. We can stream anything, order food in minutes, do everything from our phones, and somehow buying tickets to live events still feels way harder than it should be. Long lines, confusing checkout, prices jumping up at the last second, and it shouldn't be that complicated. That's where Game Time comes in because it gives fans the advantage and makes getting tickets fast and simple. I was just looking at tickets and I wanted to tell all those, Dodgers, Padres fans that it's coming, right? Dodgers, Padres coming up, and great news for the Dodgers fans. You can go to a really great ballpark down at Petco. I don't necessarily want to see him there, but if you want to see a great ballpark, you can find that. And it's only $64 for the Wednesday, May 20th game, but also Tuesday, Monday, you can get him for less than $70 on all of those days with Game Time. Plus, the closer it gets to the first pitch, the lower the price gets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets to every type of event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. All right, David, well, we still have some more to get into. It was great timing. The Chargers signed David Njoku, and we also got to hear from their tight end coach for the first time, Chandler Henley, and also got to hear from Charlie Kolar, who's a little bit of a character. He's going to be a funny guy if we get to see more of him at the podium, I believe. You brought up him getting back from his honeymoon in Greece. Now his wife kidnapped him. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to miss the voluntary, OTAs or the voluntary workouts. But I did want to start continuing this Oronde Gadsden conversation with what his coach actually said about him. And I think there was one part in there that stood out to me. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it was spectacular about what he said about him. And he said that he actually put on a little bit of weight, which I think is a great sign for him, because we all know, as you talked about the numbers, it was very kind of indicative of what he was going to do when he was on the field. He said he put on some weight and he looks really good trying to understand what we do. And I think it fits his skill set, where I am able to use his receiving ability and athleticism to go commit to running off the line of scrimmage and blocking people. He has a world of potential. That is some big praise there from the tight ends coach. And I think it's just a great idea, right? For Oronde, to get, a little bit more weight on, right? To be able to block a little bit more proficiently, because that's just going to make him that much more deceptive, right? You can't key in on the fact that he's on the field that is automatically going to be a pass play. Yeah. That's what they're trying to do. That's what allows the play action game to be so effective, when you have guys that you absolutely have to try to figure out whether they're run blocking or pass blocking, and there's no actual kind of tell that you can key in on to try to figure that out.
Yeah, and the thing is like, just the better you are blocking, the more you're going to be on the field. Like, sometimes it can be that simple, right? It can be that black and white. Like, there's always going to be a role for Oronde Gadsden, and I think obviously the great part of it is, to your point, like, we saw them do it with Darren Waller. Like, Darren Waller is much even closer to Oronde Gadsden skill set wise than he is with David Njoku, right? Especially body type wise, just more long, slender kind of guys that never really asked to block and also were converted wide receivers. And Darren Waller, had 6 touchdowns last year in like 9 games. So what you're hoping for though is you don't want him in a Darren Waller role, right? You want him to have a much bigger role. And I think that he has that same skill set to even a younger Darren Waller. But I did think it was very interesting that Chandler Henley multiple times mentioned how in this scheme that they have right now, finding ways to use your ability as a receiver to help the run game, right? And having it not always necessarily be about just driving your man off the line of scrimmage, but being able to use the threat of you beating someone with your route and then going to block them, actually helping much more than just trying to, put your hand in the dirt and knock them off of the line of scrimmage. So he said that's different than what they had been being taught before. Shout out Andy Bischoff. But at the same time, I'd say that, it is interesting seeing, like, hey, there are other ways, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the most physically imposing guy to be an effective blocker or to help out the running game in this way. But there was one thing I saw from the press conferences where I'm like, okay, well, this signing makes the most sense possible. And it was Charlie Kolar and his quote. I had heard it. Thank you to Alex Ingold, who had it transcribed, who said, "There's something so beautiful about you're up 6 points. It's like 3rd and 3. You know you're running it. There's 2 minutes left in the game. They have no timeouts. You get a first down. The game's over. They know you're running it. Your wife knows you're running it. Their wife knows you're running it. You still run it. That is that is more satisfying than any touchdown I've ever had. That's one thing I've grown to appreciate in the NFL." And that was the most Jim Harbaugh quote ever, right? And like, it's such an underrated thing where it's like, a lot of guys would be more excited about a touchdown, but like, there is something about that, right? Like, just a battle of wills. And he also said, physicality will never die in the NFL. Like, being able to out physical the people in front of you is always going to be an important asset. And that is something, as someone, as he put it, who at college was basically just a receiving tight end, right? He had to learn, right? And it was so cool because it's like, you could hear when he's saying it, it's like, yeah, this dude really wants to just be that dude who can go out there and grind somebody into dust.
Yeah, I mean, you hear him talking, you're like, man, I know Jim Harbaugh is sitting here listening to this going, yep, that's exactly why I signed this guy. That's exactly why I brought him in. That's the mentality that he loves in his. He
probably listens to it every night before he goes to bed.
Oh yeah, it's part of his words of affirmation for sure. Yeah. And it's just because, like, in those moments, in those situations where just everybody knows what you're going to do, and then you still have the ability to find success, even though everybody knows it, that's just imposing your will on your opponent and doing whatever you want, whether they like it or not. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about when you're playing that level of football, when you're just straight up kicking the teeth in of your opponent, where it feels like there's not much more sweeter things in the world.
Yeah, and the thing is, man, like, there's not many walk-off touchdowns, right? Like, when you have that moment where you get those 3 yards and basically just end the game right there and get to end the game in victory formation, like, that is a special thing. And then it's one of the hardest things to do in the NFL is when they know you're going to run it into, exactly. Like, when you know they're running, they know you're running, and you can still do it anyways. Like, one of the best things. So I thought he was a great interview today, and just talking about, like, hey, I was a receiver coming out, but then I got to Baltimore, and it's like, okay, here's Isaiah Likely, who just signed a gigantic contract in New York with the Giants. Here's Mark Andrews, one of the best tight ends in the game. Where are you going to fit in, right? And he said, hey, I knew the way for me to fit in was to be able to learn how to block and do it exceptionally well.
And I wanted to play, so I had to figure it out.
Yeah, he's a competitor. He said, I knew my way of playing was going to be run blocking and being able to block. And that's the crazy thing. You see his stats and you're like, oh, well, they just got a specifically run blocking tight end. And you forget that at Iowa State, he was that guy. He was one of the top receiving tight ends in the country at one point. And I think having all those guys who can block like him, but can also catch passes and be legitimate threats is huge. The other thing that was interesting that Chandler Henley pointed out was Scott Matlock officially moving to tight end and having a great buy-in so far at that position. What did you think about that?
Yeah, wow. I mean, another position change for Scott Matlock. Like, that is unbelievable. I mean, obviously he came into the league as a defensive lineman, then got transitioned to fullback, and now he's going to tight end. And according to tight ends coach Chandler Henley, referred to Scott Matlock as a Y blocking tight end instead of a fullback. We asked him, and he's been willing, and he has been awesome. I'm excited. He was willing to make the switch, and he has gone all in. And I think this was a lifeline for Scott Matlock, to be quite honest. I think, obviously, as a fullback, that position has already been taken up by a real, actual fullback and Alec Ingold. So you got to get in where you fit in. And we know, obviously, with him being a fullback, that there's some similarities to that role as a blocking tight end. It just seems like Tucker Fisk is gone. Scott Matlock is basically assuming that exact position.
And he said one of the funny things about Scott Matlock specifically is that him and the other coaching staff all kind of came up independently when they came back together after watching kind of what the Chargers were last year, saying like Scott Matlock could be a wide tight end, right, and be at the end of the line of scrimmage and bring something to the table from that aspect. And I know Daniel Popper asked him about the functional movement, right, and just as a guy who's a lineman, right, and a fullback, but not much of a big time mover, not considered that necessarily, right, by fullback measurements, especially.
Right.
And he said no issues I've seen with him as from a functional movement standpoint. So interesting, right? Like it gives the Chargers another look as really just a huge body on the end of the line of scrimmage.
Definitely.
As opposed to maybe like an additional offensive lineman out there, but someone that can, run in the flat route, or do whatever you need to do in the kind of a total surprise situations, run a little hook. But like,
Sure.
I still think it's going to be hard for him to make the team. It'll depend, how willing,
Especially now.
roster-wise, after the David Njoku signing, knowing the Alec Ingold spot is going to be locked up. Now, I don't know if there's like much competition. I know they brought in another undrafted free agent who was in for a tryout. It's all going to be kind of an uphill battle. I know he does bring something to the table, but like differently from a physical standpoint, body type wise. But I don't know, man. It's just, are they willing to keep four tight ends?
How many tight ends are they going to carry?
Four tight ends and a fullback, right? Because we know
Yeah.
Alec Ingold's going to be part of that. We know Alec Ingold can play some tight end. So do you need that? So it'll be interesting. Hopefully he excels at it and shows he can do it at a high level. But I think if it wasn't the Alec Ingold signing, right, and then the Charlie Kolar signing in addition to that, now obviously with the signing that happens today of David Njoku, it just seems less and less likable. He is someone that plays a lot of special teams. That'll be in his favor for sure.
That is true.
But yeah, now Scott Matlock from defensive line to fullback to tight end. That's where he's going to be at when training camp starts this year. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. The good news is we didn't do buy or sell today, which means we're pushing it to tomorrow, and you guys can still get your buy or sells in at Locked On LIC on Twitter, at Locked On Chargers on Instagram, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page, or call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924 to give us your biggest Charger storylines or overreactions. But the best way to never miss the show, especially when we have news like today, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcasts from. And also now, if you want an ad-free audio version of the show, you can get that in the Locked On Everydayer Club, which you can find out about in the show notes, and you can get exclusive access to the Locked On Chargers Discord channel. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you're back here tomorrow for Buy or Sell Wednesday. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bulls.